When we look at the demographic shift caused by these conquests, first off, the native population is going to be completely decimated. When you look at the overall native population, it's going to go from about 125 million down to less than 5 million or so. And we have areas like the Caribbean where the native population almost completely was wiped out. In Mexico, the native population goes from over 20 million down to about 2 million. In Peru, the old Inca Empire, they're going to drop from about 10 million down to less than 2 million. And again, all of this was due to these Afro-Eurasian diseases such as smallpox, influenza, and measles. As a result, some areas were completely abandoned, and many of the traditional Indian institutions, their culture, their economic systems were completely wiped out. And that's going to kind of pave the way for Europeans to step in and fill those voids. And that's exactly what we're going to see. European plants and animals and culture is going to replace the native culture. And Europeans are going to come in and take over the Native American lands. And Europeans are going to bring with them their livestock like sheep, horses, and cattle. They're going to bring with them their own crops that will replace the native varieties. And it was mostly due to the idea that Europeans saw their own culture as superior. And again, they were trying to recreate what they had back in Europe over here in the Americas. So, question of morality. With the mistreatment of these natives, the question of morality did come into play and was actually raised back in Spain. And originally, there were Spanish scholars who studied this issue, and they came to justify the conquest of the Americas as what they called Sepulveda. And Sepulveda was a Spanish scholar who actually studied the mistreatment of the natives and put out a book that supported Spanish conquest of the Americas. And basically in this book, and he based a lot of his studies on the works of Aristotle, he basically said that it was justified, partially because the natives were not fully human. They weren't seen as equals to the Europeans. And secondly, the idea was that the Europeans were bringing civilization and Christianity and a superior culture to the Americas. And so they justified the conquest and the mistreatment of these natives under this idea of Sepulveda. Well, the Spanish crown is going to step in and actually create a commission in 1550 to investigate the mistreatment of the natives. And during this commission, they actually suspended all conquest in the Americas. And the king created this council that studied and made arguments on both sides for the conquest of the Americas. And one of the few defenders for the Native Americans was a man named Bartolomé de las Casas. And he's going to speak out against this practice of Sepulveda, and he's going to defend the natives and show that they were fully human. And the crown actually somewhat supported de las Casas. But ultimately, there was too much wealth to be made in the Americas to completely stop the conquest. And so instead, they do get rid of some of the worst abuses, but the conquest of the Americas would continue. So following 1570 or so, we're going to move past this age of the conquistadors and haphazard conquests and into the more formal administration of the Americas. The Spanish government actually steps in and creates a stable bureaucracy. And so to do this, they create two administrative centers. One in Mexico that's going to be centered on Mexico City, the new capital, and another in Peru, where they actually build a whole new capital. The old Inca capital at Cuzco wouldn't work. And so they create a new capital at Lima. And this becomes the two administrative centers for the Spanish in the Americas. And they appoint two viceroys, one at each of these centers, to kind of oversee the affairs in their region. And these viceroys were supposed to carry out the wishes of the king in the Americas. And to ensure this, underneath these viceroys, they had a council called the Audiencias. And this was made up of Spanish nobility, and their job was to assist the viceroys, and they helped kind of carry out the wishes of the king. And then furthermore, these audiencias also kind of kept an eye on the viceroys, and they reviewed the viceroys and reported back to the king to ensure that the viceroys were carrying out the king's wishes. And so the bottom line here is that the Spanish king and the Spanish government kept pretty tight control of their territory over in the Americas. Now, these viceroys still had quite a bit of local autonomy because of distance. It took a long time to send a message from Spain to the Americas and send a reply back. And so they did have local autonomy, but the king did keep a pretty close eye on the territory in the Americas. Similarly, Brazil was granted to the Portuguese. And this was under a treaty called the Treaty of Tordesillas that basically split the territory in the Americas between Spain and Portugal. And Spain got most of it, but Portugal was left with Brazil and some territory in the Caribbean. And at first, they really didn't show a lot of interest in Brazil. But as other countries began to show an interest in Brazil, especially France, then the Portuguese step in and kind of take tighter control of Brazil. And similar to Spain, they kept pretty tight control of this territory. They appointed a royal governor to oversee their territory there. And Brazil is going to come to rely on sugar production, and sugar plantations will spread, especially along the coastal regions of Brazil.